Can we run one more loud salawat for the hastening of the Imam, inshallah? Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum. Firstly, I want to start off this program by giving a huge thanks and jazakallah to Maulana Sayyid Jafri for giving us yet another night following his extensive discussion on examining ourselves post-Muharram. So just to give a sort of a rundown of the program for the night, we'll have about 15-minute speech by Maulana Sayyid Jafri on leading a Husseini lifestyle. Followed by that, we'll have an open Q&A. There'll be a text number on the screen, so feel free to text that number your question, and then inshallah we can address them one by one, inshallah. With that said, I'd like to pass it over to Maulana Sayyid Jafri with a loud salawat. Allahumma.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين وهو خير ناصر ومعين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. 15 minutes is quite long for me right now. It seems like an hour and 15 minutes for me. I'll keep it short, and what I really want to hear is your questions, and then we'll go from there. Look, it's a simple conversation and then not so simple conversation. The principles that Imam Hussein has left behind are several, and ones that should really travel outside the prescribed days of grief, and really should sort of implement themselves into our lives and our daily sort of routine. Two of them I'll cover quickly. One of them is, and we should know that he left behind a process for us when he dealt with Yazid the way that he did. It was a process. There wasn't an immediate result to what he did. He was martyred on the plains of Karbala, but Yazid was still in power for 2 years after the day of Ashura. What he did do was that he left behind a process for us to implement, inshallah. The first principle of that process was sacrifice. The idea of traveling outside of you and breaking the chains of individualism and not thinking that you are only responsible for yourself. And this power of sacrifice, this power of giving, he realized that not only for himself, but he realized that for his companions, his family, his women, his children, and is able to export that onto others to the point where they would try to convince him that please let me also be included amongst those who sacrifice whatever I have, be it my life or be it my wealth, whatever the case may be. In a world today where what's really being preached is a me-centric world, that you have to worry about yourself and only worry about yourself, and everyone else has their own sort of individual path. This beauty of sacrifice is a little bit lost. The idea of doing something for others without an expectation of return is a lost art nowadays. And the Quran, very beautifully, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ, that you won't reach the level of birr, of being abrar, until you give out of what you love. And even the word birr itself has a beautiful meaning in Quranic Arabic. The English translation you'll hear is righteousness. Birr, and the opposite of birr is bahar. Okay, bahar, we talk about water or sea or a river. Barr is land, but it's a very extensive land. Okay, it's a vast land. It's a gustardi, as they say in Farsi, a zameen. Really, really, sometimes until as far as the eye can see, we call that land birr. And so when Allah says that you can reach the level of becoming an abrar who does birr, what He means is that your goodness, your character, that sacrifice will have such a ripple effect that it will actually cover the amount that a zameen covers when it's called birr. That's the power of sacrifice. So, for example, we look at Imam Hussein's sacrifice, and I mentioned this in the day majlis today. His sacrifice was made in a desert in the northern of Iraq that had nothing. There was nobody around it. There was maybe towns a little bit down, but nobody knew who Karbala was. And today we have 22 million walking to Karbala, right? So, when the ripple effect of that sacrifice reaches to that level, that sacrifice is one that we should stop and think about. So the idea of being sacrificial without the desire to be noticed is important. And that segues to my second point, and that is to be anonymous. Okay? Imam Hussein didn't feel the need to bring the battle of Karbala to the busy streets of Medina. Didn't choose a large city like Kufa, for example. He was perfectly okay with shedding his blood, like I said, in a very uninhibited, a very empty desert known as Karbala. Knowing full well that when I serve Allah, when I sacrifice for Allah, when I give to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will in turn, of course, make my sacrifice known. That wasn't the intention of Imam Hussein, but it's very much a promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not possible, he says, there's a beautiful hadith by Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wa salam, Allahumma salli ala. He says, if I can remember it, مَا مِنْ عَبْدٍ أَسِرَّ الْخَيْرِ, that it's not possible that an abd of Allah, a servant of Allah, does sirr khair, covers their good. Like sirr means, whisper or secret. That keeps their goodness a secret. It's not possible that there are people that work so hard to keep their goodness a secret, and the hadith goes on, ذَهَبَتِ الْأَيَّامِ الْعَبَدَانِ حَتَّى يُظْهِرُ اللَّهُ لَهُ خَيْرًا. That after a certain passage of time, God will do what? He'll make that good that the mu'min worked really hard to cover, He'll make it zahir and apparent to everybody else. So where is that empty desert of Karbala, and where is Karbala today? And that was all the idea, that we don't need to sit there and make every act that we do this enormous announcement. We leave that respect and that khair and that praise with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Kam min thana'in jamila lastu ahla lahunna sharta du'aikum. That how much of this thana'i jamil, we say, this beautiful praise, that lastu ahlan, I'm not the ahl of that praise. I'm not worthy of that beautiful praise. Nashartahu, that Allah has spread about me. Right? How much praise do we have as people in the hearts of others that really, if we look in our deep hearts, we're not deserving of that praise. At least I know I'm not. Right? Where, this same Hadith Qudsi of Allah says, if my creations know about you what I know about you, then not one would say salam to you, forget praise you. And yet Imam Ali says there is such beautiful praise, worthy, this jameel praise, that you're not the ahl of, and yet Allah says, I have spread that. Thank you very much, my dear. Allah give you a long life and bless your father, inshallah. Thank you so much. And so, those are two that come to mind. There are several, but they both go hand in hand, sacrificing for others, but doing it anonymously. Knowing full well that we have to travel sometimes, guys, outside of us. Not be so consumed with me and I. Sometimes doing something for others and then leaving it alone is beautiful. That's what Imam Hussein did. So we'll stop there. Any questions at all, then I'm open. I'd rather hear your questions than you hear me. I just spoke for 45 minutes. So. Where's Hamad Ashar Sahab? Bismillah, we're open for questions. Yeah.
It's like extra questions.
Oh, there you go. Okay, all right. I always have a little bit of a speech before my Q&As. If you don't mind, I'll give that speech right now. So questions are asked for two reasons. How many? Two reasons. One is either to test somebody, or one is to actually learn. So if you're going to test me, I'll tell you right now, I'm going to fail that test. Absolutely. I'm no one to learn from, so even that is going to be a zero for you. So, sometimes questions should be asked that that can really benefit everybody else. Is there? What's the third reason? Until you get the right. I keep asking you the reason. Yeah. So just so I can save half the questions. Music is haram. Don't get a tattoo. You can't do wudu on socks. That covers 85% of the questions. All right. Now let's ask your questions. Yeah, inshallah. I'm kidding. I've asked him to do a hard stop at 12, please. It's been a long day for a lot of us. These are being vetted and they're being filtered at the discretion of the My Society. So if you feel like your question wasn't asked to me, there's a reason for that. You can come ask me privately. Maybe sometimes not everything is meant for a public gathering like this.
So I think test.
Turn it on. Is it on?
It's on.
Yeah. Bismillah.
Yeah. So we have a question here. The question asks, could you please clarify the difference between Iman Saghir and Kabir versus Islam Saghir and Kabir, as you mentioned in your speech?
Yeah, so I had mentioned, that's a good question. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So I mentioned there are levels, right? I mean, everything is tashkiki, as we say in Islamic philosophy. There's gradation, there is levels, there's advancement. We should never be comfortable where we are. There's always a level to be achieved, no matter where we are. Okay? It'll never be the case where you've achieved all the levels. There's always 1 inch higher for you to travel. And I talked about the very basic is this Islamic Saghir and Islamic Kabir. Let's talk about that. So Islamic Saghir is a basic understanding of Islam. Perhaps, telling your coworkers, yes, I'm Muslim, but really your life doesn't really resemble that. Telling yourself that, yes, I believe in a higher power, in a God, let's say, for example. Sure, the Prophet of Allah is a Prophet of Allah, and that's sort of a Saghiri approach, meaning a lower level of Islam. And then as you get higher within the realm of Islam now, you begin to actually study Islam and understand Tawheed to a certain area. Then you start to practice that Tawheed in the form of Salat and fasting and Hajj, etc., etc. Iman, like I said earlier, is more of an internal qalbi discussion, where Iman has been, used as an example of light or nur in a dark area. It doesn't really have a physical reality to it. It's very batini or very esoteric inside of you. It also has, of course, levels. I'm saying Saghir and Kabir, that's what the books of Irfan talk about, but really it's the idea that, Iman also has levels. There are those that attempt now to cleanse their heart of those things that are malices inside of them, the envy and the jealousy and the hatred and the riyah and the ostentation and those sort of known diseases of the heart. Then there are those that really elevate to the point where they try to find Allah in everything. So these 4 are, and there's more, of course, but these 4 are, sort of a tashkiki conversation, a climb up the ladder per se, where each of them have their own sub-levels in them as well.
Jazakallah. Lana, the next question we got is, do you recommend any book that has stories or waqiyas of our imams?
Books about our imams, it depends on what level of reading you're talking about. A lot of our hadith books, Bihar, for example, books by Allama Majlisi, Ayn al-Hayat, for example, comes to mind. Sheikh Sudus Amali has a lot of stories of the Imams that are written as our hadith, for example. A lot of our tafasir, Mizan has several stories of the Imams in there as well. Looking for a historical context, we have 14 Infallibles and others, for example. A good book for our prophets would be God's Emissaries. That's a very good book, talking about Prophet Adam to Prophet Jesus. Almost every prophet in between as a beautifully relayed story with sources and well-written English. So these are all books that would talk about Imam stories. Again, depending on who's asking, if it's a kid level or a higher level, they exist alhamdulillah out there. Okay,
Jazakallah. The next question we have is, sometimes grandparents will share wisdom that we don't fully understand, such as it causes nahusat to clean the house at night, or don't leave the chappal upside down. So should we follow such commands as Islamic knowledge, or listen politely and take it as cultural customs?
Look, I've learned that if you have a buzurg in your house, someone who is a little bit older, the grandparents especially, you have the honor of having grandparents in your home, or then it's a blessing to have those people in your home. They bring about these principles and customs that I think are lost in a lot of us today. Now, will they have a backing of our hadiths, or will they sit there and say, Qala Rasulullah? No, they won't. But it comes from somewhere, may not make sense. They didn't come from a culture where they could ask, why can't my chappal be upside down, for example? But, I think there's a certain beauty to those beautiful old customs. And I think there's principles. And in fact, I've seen kids that have been raised in a house where their grandparents are there, and kids where the grandparents are not there. Obviously, I'm not being absolute in this, but I can see that those little small things, like how to greet your elders, and how to say salam, how to shake your hands, and how to dress for a majlis, how to sit in the majlis, those little small things, for example, right? Careful for najasat, for example, how to drink water, how not to waste food. Those things come from our buzurgan, our elders. Unless they're asking you to challenge the Sharia, then that's different. But if they're asking you that, I don't want this manus energy inside of my home, so can you just please unflip the chappal, then unflip the chappal. That's okay. You'll be all right, inshallah. But just overall, the message is that, there's a lot of wisdom there that may not make sense to you. But it comes from somewhere, right? I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but not everything requires a fight or dalil or show me in the Quran. You can unflip the chappal. You'll be all right, inshallah. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that answer. The next question we have is, why are we seeing regression in our communities despite years of azadari? Have ayatollahs or maraji advised on this issue?
Why are we seeing aggression in our communities?
Regression. Yeah.
That's my question for 4 nights. I don't know. I wish I had the answer to that. If I had the answer to that, then it would be different. And I don't think it's all regression. I think that there is a lot of movement, especially amongst the young guys, for the past several years. I think the level of awareness, the level of ma'rifat, and the level of Islamic knowledge they've gained from the Farshi Azah, I don't think that's being measured. I know I was a little bit strong in the past 4 nights, but that was for a reason. But I don't think it's been all doom and gloom. I think there's been a lot of progression. Now, if we've regressed, it's partly because I don't think we have understood that these ayam azah are avenues of us progressing. I think there is sometimes this outlook that we have a certain historical event to uphold. We have a certain way of doing things. We're doing it. We're making sure that we're doing it. Otherwise, our kids won't understand that. But to find my inner sense of revolution, to find my inner tawheed in a majlis, let's say, for example, sometimes I don't make that connection. Or I don't seek out, like I said, this fa'ali nature of my aql, where it's active, where I'm looking, let's say, for example, to sit with the alim who's from out of town and try to learn from him, and not compare him to other ulama or compare answers between ulama or this and that, making sure that I'm actively seeking out knowledge from the right source, for example. Right? If that's truly happening, then we can expect progression within ourselves. Right? On top of that, it's hard to measure regression. Yes, we see sometimes that and sometimes the very small few amount who are regressing are the loudest. So we assume that everyone's like that. When unfortunately, it's not the case. Sometimes the ones who are progressing quietly. So it's not an absolute conversation. I do wish that we would be better at our marriages, at raising our children. And I'm the first one to talk to myself up here, given the fact that we have this treasure of ayam azah. I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I do think there is some progression. It's just that the ones that are progressing, they don't really scream, I'm progressing. You can see it in their actions. But sometimes the loudest ones are only a few, if that makes sense.
Right. So like sort of what you mentioned just earlier on about like staying anonymous while pursuing good endeavors.
Yeah, part of it is the fact that unfortunately sometimes there's a lot of dikaba, a little bit of ego, a little bit of pride on this farsh aza, especially in a world of glamorization where everything is a YouTube short video or a soundbite or WhatsApp clip or this and that or an Instagram reel. It's hard to stay anonymous in this era, for sure.
Got it. Okay, so the next question we have is...
I'm happy you got it. Let's get it.
So to what degree do we have the freedom to change the method of azadari, especially in the context of the modern era?
Oh boy. You guys are getting me in trouble.
It's getting harder progressively.
Well, look. Let's go back a little bit. Let's not assume that the way that right now azadari is being done is completely cultural. Number one. A lot of what we see, and hear me out, a lot of what we see in the format of a majlis comes from the seerah of the Ahlul Bayt. And there are hadiths that perhaps are not read. I don't know, maybe all of you know them. When I discovered them, it's quite surprising to me. The whole idea, I've talked about this several times, the whole concept of a marsiya or a marthiya, it's actually an Arabic word. It's not something that is an Indo-Pak reality. This is something that the Imams would do time and time again. They would ask the poets to come and write poetry to describe the shahadat of their Jad Hussain. And they would ask the poet to come and recite that in front of them. If you understood a little bit of Urdu and you hear the marsiyas, it's nothing short of the maqtal of Imam Hussain. They're describing sometimes in detail the shahadat of a certain shaheed in a poet's way. And if there isn't riqqat that we use in Urdu, if there isn't that sort of environment that's very grieving environment, the Imams would stop the shair and say, no, can you please put a little bit more emotion into it? And so you'll see a lot of it. And even I'll give you simple examples and don't laugh at me. Even growing up, I'm like, what are they doing? Like, are they background singers? What are they? Until somebody told me it's not it's actually hi, like that. So they're actually creating an environment of grief. So they have people around them who are actually saying hi. That's what a very prominent Marsiya Khan back in the day. In fact, it was Shaykh Sita Jafar who told me in London, UK. I met him years ago. And I asked him about this, and he would tell me, Asad Mir Johed, they're saying hi. They're actually creating an environment of grief, and then the poet begins their poetry. That was done back in the Imam's time. Sina Zani and Matam and Noha, and then of course the Majlis of Imam Hussain. All these things were done during the Imam's times, right? Now, at what level, like this, like not this, that's a different story. But this format isn't something that was simply made up, okay? Beginning with Quran and ending with Ziyarat, all those things are great. So the whole format doesn't need to be thrown out the window. I don't know what you mean by format. Do you mean like language, or do you mean like, for example, doing something else? And again, I don't think that in this day and age, I don't think our parents would throw a huge protest if things were a little bit mixed up in between. Like, for example, yesterday, we had an English Majlis and we had Urdu Masai. That usually isn't the case in Indo-Pak community. But nobody protested outside. I don't think anybody did. Nobody canceled their membership, did they? No, nobody did. Right? In fact, I thought it was beautiful, right? It was quite inclusive. So I think that we're quick to assume that a lot of people are stuck in their ways. And maybe they are, but I think that's changing slowly. But let's not be quick to cancel the entire format. Even something like Faqa Shikni. Faqa Shikni is that idea on the day of Ashura that at 4 o'clock or so after Asr Ashur, we eat. That's actually a straight tradition from Imam Sadiq. Somebody asked him, do we fast on the day of Ashura? He says, no, but do a half fast, he says. Try not to eat anything, he says, until an hour after Asr. Then open that fast at that moment. Do not go all the way till iftar. It's actual word-for-word hadith I've seen with my own eyes by Imam Sadiq. That's precisely what Faqa Shikni is on the day of Ashura. We think, this came from this Rasul or that culture. Not the case. A lot of what we are told to do comes from the Ahlul Bayt, right? Now, are we sometimes, stuck in that? Do we sometimes add to it? Instead of one marsiya, we have three marsiyas, mashallah. Instead of one naha, we have six nahas, right? Are we stuck on timing, for example? On a random weeknight, we have four nahas. That's a different discussion. That's a logistical matter. But this idea of the format, the way that we are now doing our gham for Imam Hussein, is not just some randomly created format that we have from our elders. It comes down from the seerah, if not of the Ahlul Bayt, then for sure of the uqala and those that were done. The ulama now in front of the Maraji have done this, all these in front of us, right? And it's pretty much shared across the different cultures.
Okay, so
If there's follow-up on that question from the floor, I'll take those questions, but not new ones unless they're filtered. So follow-up for that'll be great. Or if you want to add anything, especially my elders, Bismillah, please. You can keep it within half an hour, that'll be great. That'll be really good. Whatever your follow-up is. Okay, go ahead.
actually there is a follow-up on this question. So the follow-up is, do we want our rituals to continue in closed doors, or do we want to include others in the universal message of Imam Hussein?
I think ultimately, if we look at the seerah of Bibi Zainab, and this is really where we have to understand what is our approach here in the West when it comes to this aza. And I have said this many times, there are three different principles or three different paths that we extract from the day of Ashura. One's a Yazidi path, one's a Husseini path, one's a Zainabiya path. So the Yazidi path, of course, is the one who does dhulm and oppression and fitna, and that's being done right now as we speak and all over the Islamic world and really all over globally right now. Then there's that Husseini approach, which really requires you to give your blood and be a martyr and be on the front lines. And there are people in the East, more or less, who are who are right now protecting our maqam and muqaddasat, who are there right now, and they're celebrated, for example, in their various countries. Then there's a Zainabi approach, which is really, a war of awareness, a process of spreading the message of what Imam Hussein did. So taking the tragedy of Karbala to Kufa, then to Sham, in the courtyard of Sham, talking in front of men, going to Medina, for example, again talking about what happened, right? It tells us that it wasn't meant to be in closed doors. Now, mind you, what you do in closed doors, what you do on the streets has to be a little bit different. The essence is the same, but the form may change. Same idea, what I do at home, what I do outside the home will be different. But I do think sometimes we need to be a little bit more inviting towards in our four walls. I think we're still a little bit cultured. One or two centers I've been to that are really welcoming towards those, for example, don't speak Urdu, don't speak Farsi, don't speak Persian, other languages. We are still a little bit, in our own sort of bubble in our chambers. We're going to break a little bit out of that. We're getting better, but I thought we'd be a little bit further ahead by now. Yeah. So, for example, our jaluses, for example, and this is where I might upset some of you. Our jaluses have to mirror where we are. The entire maqsad and purpose behind a jalus is to make Hussein's mission tablighi in nature, to make it a propagation of his message. Well, that propagation only makes sense when it mirrors the language and the culture about what you're doing the propagation of, right? So, Urdu banners and flags of Pakistan on McCowan Road may not serve that purpose. I have no problem with Pakistani flags, but may not serve that purpose unless there's billboards, unless there's pamphlets, unless there's people handing out to those who are watching these guys downtown to figure out what exactly are they doing. They don't have shirts on, they're beating their chest. At that moment, is it possible for us to sort of, mirror that tabligh so that it fits the form of this country and not just cut and paste it from our respective countries, right? So again, the essence will be the same, tabligh, but the form, I think, should change depending on where you're doing it.
Right, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense and ties in perfectly to the next question we had. So the next question we have is, what is the benefit in having children who don't have any connection with the language of their ancestors recite nohas in the same language? That is, should we strengthen our cultural expression of azah, or should we advocate for a new generation to connect with azah in a manner that is more relevant for them?
Holy smokes. Sorry? Balance. I think the answer to that is, I don't claim to have an answer to that. That's more of an opinion. It's not based on any sort of I do know that the ulama do stress on the idea of holding on to your cultural values. Many of you have gone to seen Sayyid Sistani in Iraq. He does have the same message for a lot of groups, that when you go back home, maintain your cultural values. I'm not an advocate of the fact that you have to teach your child Urdu or Farsi, for example, but I do think that they're missing out when that language is not known to them. I think that these languages are not just cultural languages, but the Arabic, Urdu, and Farsi, but they're languages of the deen as well. A lot of our work has been done in these three languages. Translations or speeches or tafasir or big hadith books. Very few, unfortunately, are done properly in English by a proper scholar. A lot of it is done in these three languages. And so when you do know these languages, an entire door opens up for you, an entire world of knowledge opens up to you, which I think is deprived sometimes when you don't know. But does that mean that you can't do your azan in English? No, of course not. And we've seen, mashallah, the increase of that. We're seeing now, English nohas being written incredibly by some of our talented brothers in our own community, which really captures the beauty of it. And so I don't think we're not narrowing the azan down to one language, but I do think that the more avenues you have for Imam Hussein, the better it is for yourself, no doubt. Please.
So I guess my question is, when it comes to like the actions that we have in Islam, for example, Salah, so when we're fasting, there's rules to everything. If I'm praying here or I go somewhere else, it's the same Salah. If I'm fasting here, I'm fasting somewhere else, it's the same timings and so forth. If I go for Hajj, there's specific rules. Why is it that when it comes to the Azadari, which can sometimes, at times we're told can be higher than those actions, we're given a little bit more freedom in terms of how we do it and
yeah, so I don't know. I don't know if I would place Azadari higher than any of those actions. Those are actions that are the rights of God, right? So that's haqqullah. Salat is the right of God. Fasting is a right of God. Tawaf of the Bayt is a right of God. And he's very adamant that if you're going to worship me, this is how I want you to worship me. It doesn't matter where you are. And those are wajib, flat out. Those are an obligation. We can't classify Azadari as a wajib act per se, shara'an. So that has the Sharia bound to it, that has the haqq of Allah bound to it, that has a number of things bound to it. This Azadari is, you're asked to remember Imam Hussein. Now, the blessing we have is that 8 Imams after Imam Hussein, excluding Imam Zamana, had remembered Imam Hussein. So a lot of what we're asked to do, we can just look to them to find out how they did it. And they become a sunnat for us, they become hujjat for us. But there's no Sharia rulings involved, unless of course you go outside. There are rules that are broken in terms of mahram and non-mahram, and women are watching men and blah blah blah, and this and that, shedding blood, najasat. That's of course a fiqhi discussion. But how to actually commemorate Imam Hussein can't be locked down like the rules of Salat are, because they're not at the same level. Yeah. Now one can argue that possibly the azan leads you to become a better practicing Muslim. But in terms of acts of God, then those acts that you mentioned, the furu of the deen, have a level all to themselves. Yeah. That makes sense? Yeah. Sorry?
Azan has the emotion involved.
Yeah.
So everyone acts differently when it comes to emotion.
Right. Yeah, so that's another good point, is that, who takes what from this azan emotionally is different. But even in that emotion, I was trying to get that point across for 4 nights. Even that emotion has to be wrapped up in our intellect, and that's why the Maraji felt the need to give certain rulings in fatwa about how you commemorate Imam Hussein's, because you don't want to go kharij as aql. You don't want to leave the intellect and allow this beast of emotion now get to the point where now you're a little bit out of control. And because it is emotional, that's why people, they can't sync themselves with the fatwas of the Maraji, only because they say, look, this is between me and my Mawla Hussein. You have no part in that. You can give your fatwas on Salat and Sawm and Hajj, but leave this one for us. He says, look, I can't because it's gonna affect the deen's movement altogether, right? So.
Okay. So the next question we've got is how do we reconcile potentially fabricated narratives of certain events and characters with respect to the events of Karbala, and connecting to that state of mourning and azad, despite having to question whether the masa'ib is based on reliable sources?
Yeah. So, look, remember, we don't have the luxury of having mutawatir ahadith when it comes to Karbala. This is not the event of Ghadir, where people can't deny it because there are 70, 75 different narrators on the event of Ghadir, where it cannot be denied, or the details of the event are not drastically different. But Imam Hussein's Karbala that day, there may be at the most one or two, that's it. There were a couple of reporters from their side. Imam Hussein didn't really appoint any reporter to come with me and write down everything that I'm doing. Yes, we hear the names of Hamid ibn Muslim and others as well, that's fine. But when you don't have enough mutawatir, so many narrators that you can't deny the event, then of course, there is a difference of opinion, number one. Number two, there's also something to be said about the secrecy of the Imam sometimes. Not everything they did and how they did it is open for knowledge, right? On top of that, what I often say to people is that, yes, there seems to be, a difference of opinions, or even to the point where you get stuck on details. It doesn't lessen the grief if Ali Akbar was 18 or 27, for example. It doesn't lessen the grief if, for example, Ona Muhammad, one of them wasn't Bibi Zainab's, for example's son. It doesn't lessen Imam Hussein's dhulm if, let's say, maybe there was water, as some had said, maybe, on the night of Ashura in the tent of Imam Hussein. But for some people, it's blasphemy. Like, how could you? How dare you? And they'll come and they're ready to fight with you because they have such a strong connection to these small details that they end up saying, look, you're questioning the whole event. No, I'm not. Right? Whether or not Ali Akbar was this amount or that amount, long hair, short hair, doesn't change the fact that what happened to him, right? So that's the first thing. The reliable sources, you have to look at where you're getting those sources from, right? And that's why it's important that you, as a crowd, as a majma, as someone who is the listeners, that you pick properly where that knowledge is coming from, right? If I'm not mistaken, it's Imam Hadi alayhi salatu wasalam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. If I have the hadith in my head, I ask Allah to help me. He says, Man asgha ila natiqan faqad abadahu. It's a very beautiful statement. The one who does asgha yani the one who listens and implements what he listens with a natiq, with any speaker, that listener of that speaker, faqad abaduhu, becomes a slave of that speaker. I mean, that speaker can say left and they'll say left. That speaker says day, he says it's day. You become a slave to that. The hadith goes on, if that natiq is talking about Allah, faqad abadullah, you become an abd of Allah. But if that natiq speaks ila lisan al-iblis, from shaitan's tongue, فَقَدْ عَبَدَ الْإِبْلِيسِ, you become a slave of shaitan. Meaning the power of a speaker is such, it can take the crowd wherever it wants to. Okay? It can take it towards Allah or take the crowd towards shaitan. Now, the hadith is not only meant for the one who is giving the lecture, it's also for the sami'in, the ones who are listening to that lecture. That pick your speakers properly. You have to be able now to approach a body of water. Look, there's a standalone river, let's say, or a small lake in a community that has no connection or no small stream, let's say, to a bigger body of water. Standalone. After a while, that water will dry up, it'll evaporate, and it can't give anything else. It's not connected. Then there are those small little lakes that if you follow the stream to it, it goes all the way to the ocean. It's connected to the bigger body of water. That lake will never dry up. So long as an ocean is there, so is that lake, right? We also have to be able to listen to individuals who have a connection to a larger body of knowledge, right? The Hawza Ilmiya of Najaf for Qum, for example, or an alim, let's say, for example, that he's connected to, for example, you can vouch for that alim. It can't just be a standalone sort of lake without a connection to a larger body of water. Because nowadays, there are some people that they don't hesitate in sitting on the minbar, even though they don't belong on the minbar, I'm sorry. And I say that as a speaker, maybe I don't belong, I don't know. But let's be a little bit careful, and based on this hadith by Imam Hadi, that not everything you hear is just simple, okay, it does go in somewhere. Let's be a little bit careful.
Right, so we actually got two follow-ups to that question, one being more relevant than the other. So with this one asks, what is the criteria that we should use to determine which speaker to listen to?
Yeah. So when you can avoid listening to me, that's the first question. Just if you're stuck, but avoid, number one. Number two is that, look, I'll give you examples that are simple, and if they're simple, I apologize. For every other field, for lack of a better word, the criteria for a doctor, for a lawyer is some form of medical school, right? Like something. It's not webmd.com. I hope not, right? You're not going to put your life or the health of your kidneys or the health of your heart into somebody who is Googling your symptoms as you're talking to him. Nor are you going to sit there and begin a legal battle with this corporation or a bunch of people from a kid who's on legal.com, for example. That much makes sense, right? Something on the wall that says, show me an MD, show me something. So at least somebody who's has some knowledge from the scholars, somebody who has some access, let's say, for example. Now, how do you find that out? You have to ask, right? If I want to get to a specialist of a doctor, I have to have the referral from a doctor. A doctor tells me that this doctor so-and-so is great, right? A lawyer tells me that lawyer is great. Sometimes if my barber can't cut my hair, I have a nice fade for you guys. You guys didn't notice my fade today. Anyways, nice fade. They'll sit there and say, look, I can't cut your hair, but that guy over there is actually better than me. Go over there. Something as small as getting my nice fade done. But when it comes to our deen and our akhirat, our qiyamat and our eternity, we can't be so quick to give it to everybody. There's got to be something there I can work with, something. Beyond, a pretty face and beyond a great accent and beyond Arabic makharij and beyond great masaib and beyond fada'il of the Ahlul Bayt, there's got to be some substance there at least, right? Now, if you're old enough to take the good and then leave everything else, that's great. But if you're not at that stage where you have that spiritual maturity or the intellectual maturity, then I think that you got to be careful. I'm not one to boycott. I'm not one to cancel. I think everyone has something to offer. But I think the pulpit is a very sacred place. And I don't think an OR should have anybody in it. I don't think a courtroom should have anybody in it. I don't think the members should have everybody on it either. But, if Imam Ali says, if Imam Ali in Nahj al-Balagha says that ilm can be found in the heart of a hypocrite, and you can gain knowledge from a hypocrite's heart, then the mu'mineen who sit on the minbar are not hypocrites at least, right? But we have to have a little bit more of a criteria sometimes, right? I try to be balanced there, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Right, understandable. So with the event coming to a close, we're just going to wrap up some of the last questions.
Are there a lot left?
No, not really, actually.
That's great to know.
So I think one other question that we had was, for people who are leaning more towards staying at home and watching majalises and milads online, how would you advise them that coming to the masjid is actually the better choice and necessary?
These questions you guys are funny, man. You guys are, I don't know why they're staying at home. Maybe they have social anxiety. Maybe they're trying to Maybe they're trying to get through what they're trying to get through. Maybe they just don't want to see human beings. I don't know. Maybe they don't like humans this week. Who knows? If there's somebody that believes that I don't need to come to the mosque or the center in order for me to benefit, and again, these are personal opinions. I don't. No, I don't have to give my personal opinion. I think that there are enough ahadiths to realize the importance of a community, the importance of a building. The first thing the Prophet did was he actually built a structure. He built a structure, and he built homes around that structure. Not for you to stay home and just be in awe of the structure, to actually be inside the structure, inside the mosque. And so, it's important that, we do have that social element inside of us. We are social human beings by nature. We require a little bit of that social interaction with others. It's important. Oftentimes people ask me, is it important to bring our kids as often as possible to the mosque? And I would say, yes, it is, if possible. That's tough nowadays with school and timings and et cetera, et cetera. That's why sometimes our centers have to be very weary of our timings sometimes. We can't be starting at 10 p.m. and expect our youth to show up, right? Or we can't be going on and on until 11 o'clock at night and say, our youth don't come. Let's be a little bit weary of the fact that if we are trying to engage kids, we have to now create the program around these kids, right? But I don't know why they're staying at home. If they're staying at home because they don't feel the need to socialize, I think it's wrong. I think it's important that not wrong. I think that what's better is that you come and you break some bread and you share a cup of tea and you see people, you ask them how they are, they ask you how they are, and that connection is very, very important. No doubt.
Got it. With your permission, one other question?
Sure, please. Yeah. 2 more is fine. Yeah.
We
said 12, hard stop. We're good.
Yeah. 12, yeah. So how do we reconcile performing our duties that we think are serving the cause of the Imam, even if it takes us to the public eye, while maintaining our humility and anonymity?
Yeah. So I think it's a great question. So if we are able to, so I'll give you a Quranic verse. It's a very nice verse. I'll give you half of it. Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 271, if my memory serves me. Allah says, "In tubdu sadaqati fana'imma biha, wa in tukhfuha wa tu'tuha al-fuqara'a fahuwa khayrun lakum." If you give sadaqah openly, where people can see you, that's great, that's good. فَنَعِمَّا هِيَ, that's a ni'mat for you, it's a blessing for you. But وَإِن تُخْفُوهَا وَتُؤْتُوهَا الْفُقَرَاءَ فَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. If you give that sadaqah to a poor individual, but you do it in a khafi manner, you do it where no one sees you, فَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. The second one is better than the first one. But the Quran doesn't cancel the first one. It says that's also good. What's better, however, is if you do it secretly. Now, sometimes we have the ulama have said that you should announce your good deeds or what you're doing for tashweek and for encouragement of others. Like sometimes, for example, when we're doing pledge drives, blah, 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 sometimes it's important that our youth stand up and say, I pledge $100. Right? That might even drive someone to say, oh, if he can pledge 100, I can pledge 200, right? So if you're doing that for that purpose, at that moment, it might be good for you to be a little bit. But sometimes, again, the Quran doesn't cancel either one out. It says they're both good. The second one is better. But if you're serving the Imam, that has to be done on the public platform, then you do it knowing full well that whatever praise you might get pales in comparison to what Allah has in store for you. So it goes back to your niyat, of course, right? It feels good to get praise, right? We're human beings. But knowing full, the next time I'm asked to do something for the Imam on a public platform, I'm not going to do it for that praise. I'll do it for the right niyat, knowing full well that God will give me the praise 10 times better than anybody else will. So my point is, that's not either or. You can still serve the Imam on a public platform and still remain anonymous inside of your heart, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
All right.
Follow up to a prior question. and this is probably our last, unless other ones are extremely important. If you remove the social aspect, this question is referring to the staying at home majlis. If you remove the social aspect, because let's say they are already tight knit with their own community, but then for whatever reason their community does not hold a majlis for an imam shahadat, and they just say we'll just watch online for another center program. What do you say to advise against that? Emphasis on removing the social aspect if possible.
But the whole, why are we removing the social aspect? Look, you know, in terms of content, fine. Whether you're sitting on the carpet or you're sitting in a living room, it's the same speaker, same live feed, blah, 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 that's fine. But the whole idea of coming to the center in the four walls is the social aspect, is the communal worship. Islam was never meant to be an individual religion. It was always meant to be a communal religion. You're sitting there in your room praying salat, Allah says, say ahdana sirat al-mustaqim. Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'een. You're by yourself, no one's around you. Guide us to the right path. You alone we worship. You alone we ask for help. It doesn't say that when you are by yourself, say, Iyaka a'budu wa iyaka asta'een. I alone you worship. I alone ask you for help. No, he says even in the state where you're by yourself, you belong to a broader communal family. To the point where even your individual worship is communal, albeit you're one, you're by yourself. So that sigha of the jama, that idea that you're using this pronoun that includes we, even in your individual salat, tells us that there's a broader purpose here God wants you to do, right? And again, I go back to Imam Ali's hadith. Forget my words. Imam Ali says, look, there is a group of sheep, then there's a lone sheep over there. Okay? And I'm sort of summarizing the hadith here, paraphrasing. And a wolf comes to attack. Will he attack? He won't attack the group, I'm outnumbered. He'll attack the lone sheep, right? When shaitan comes to attack, he can look at this big jamaat that's sitting here and say, look, I'm outnumbered. Or one guy in the corner who's reading Farada by himself because the Iman is not good enough for my jamaat, he might sit there and attack. Or some guy sitting there in the house, right? So there's beauty in the communal, right? Like there's beauty in you getting in your car, starting your car, driving to whatever masjid you go to, parking in the car, going, seeing individuals, asking how they are, connecting with individuals, having a nice cup of tea, getting back in your car and going. There's immense amount of reward for that, the hadith says. Why you're depriving yourself of that, I don't know. Being involved, and again, we talk about groupthink and this idea of belongingness and this tribalism, that's a whole different conversation, right? We have this innate need to belong to a group. Now, sitting at home by yourself, you're depriving yourself of that, right? So, right, when Allah says, وَجَعَلْنَا شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ, I placed you in tribes and nations. You have this innate need to belong to a tribe, but you want to deny that by sitting at home by yourself when the tribe is here now, commemorating Imam Hussein together. Be a part of that tribe. There's beauty in that, right? So, I mean, you can't remove the social aspect. That's simple, right? And, so I don't know why people who choose to stay at home. I don't know. If it's just because I get nothing out of coming to the center, then I think sometimes maybe they have to sort of, rethink about the entire process, what the deen says. Yeah.
Okay, Jazakallah Shaykh. Can we have one more last salawat for first Afiqat, inshallah? So as we wrap up this night, and of course the 2 months and 10 days that we've lamented Imam Hussein for, we want to thank you all, and especially Sheikh for all the time and effort that we've all invested. An announcement for the sisters, feel free to make your way to the sisters hall, inshallah. There will be refreshments served. And once again, Jazakallah everyone, and can we have one more loud salawat? Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.